what the past was. We are in a new world. And a part of this new world is that we have to figure out how to create our own way. We all have the calling, but I think we have a moral imperative that if we have the capacity to see the game, it's to figure out how to live as an artist so that we can put out the good that is trying to come through us, like Plato's in the God. I think it is the key for the people interested in the individuation process who are alive right now.
Welcome back to the transmission, my friends. As all of us meandering through the kaleidoscopic labyrinth of lifing, no, there are ups, there are downs, there are a lot of mundanes, but there's also a lot that is unspoken. The parts of your psyche, of your journey that are obscured, that no one else sees, that oftentimes we aren't even aware of or are only partially aware of ourselves. And those shadowy bits, if we're not careful, can become or remain shadow material in both the Jungian and the Platonic sense. That is, in a very eensy, oversimplified nutshell, they can exert unseen influence on us or even keep us trapped in lower slices, lower segments of reality. But as we become more aware, hopefully, we begin to see said shadows for what they are, just small dark parts of a much larger, much truer, much more beautiful, unified reality. And I don't think this needs to be said, but obviously I'm still stumbling my way through that ever-growing, fractaling shadow labyrinth. I think I always will be, but I've also learned some things over the years, particularly when it comes to traveling the labyrinth that is finding your own unique, creative way, what to watch out for, what to focus on, and I mean this both practically and psychologically. And I would also say that my dear friend Erick Godsey has learned a thing or two about that kind of creative individuation as well. Erick and I have so much in common in terms of our interest. He is highly influenced by Jung. He's well read in psychology in general. And he's also becoming a deeper and deeper student of Buddhism. Erick is also one of the most dedicated seekers I know in terms of consciousness exploration as well. It seems like every few months he's doing some kind of, extended darkness retreat, or he's going to South America to drink ayahuasca or something. Erick is also a podcaster, a writer, a close friend. He's been in the Mind Meld dozens of times at this point. But in this Mind Meld in particular, we definitely take a dip back into Plato's cave, a topic that many of you seem to love almost as much as I do, but this time we approach in a much more practical, personal, rambly way. So much more in this Mind Meld, of course, but I think that's enough context to commence this Wonder Dip. So with that, all the links that you're going to need for Erick Godsey are in the description. Same for Third Eye Drops. On that note, my friends, you know what I'm going to ask. Tickle that algorithm with a like, a sub, a comment, a share. It is really of the utmost importance. So much love to those of you doing it every week. We've also got hundreds and hundreds of audio-only Mind Melds with many brilliant beings, including dozens with Erick Godsey, so do subscribe to Third Eye Drops wherever those enter your ear holes. And if you want to go deeper, you want to commune with me and hundreds of other like-minded Wonder Dippers, join up over at patreon.com/Third Eye Drops. We've got a patron-only Discord server, book club hangs. We just did one yesterday. We do monthly what I call Wonder Gym calls. You can get rewards like stickers, pins, shirts, and more. Patreon.com/Third Eye Drops. And with that, my friends, let's meld minds with Erick Godsey. Welcome back, my brother. Always one of my favorite occasions to have you in the Mind Meld. As usual, we were just flying off the handle with 30 minutes of pre-talk that felt like it was 5 minutes. So it was just like, we got to just hit record and just trust, because I know that it's going to unfold in a way that is hopefully medicinal for all involved and hopefully tickles the pickle a bit in the process.
Yeah, man, it's always awesome to connect with you. And I just want to take a moment to give you your flowers. The video that you made on Plato's cave, I was telling you before, but like as an artist to an artist, I wanted to cry.
Wow,
because I
thank
could
you,
like
man.
really feel that it's like a new level for you, and I could see how much time that you put into it, and it's just fucking great. Like it's really good. And one thing I know about my friends who are great artists, they hate to receive their flowers, and so I still need to do it because you need to hear it. I just want to say congratulations, man.
I truly appreciate that, man. I truly appreciate it. I took a crack. It's going well so far. So I am happy. But you know how it is, man. It's like part of it is that I don't hate. I mean, I truly appreciate it. It feels good to hear. But also, I think when you know what it's like when you first start doing creative stuff, you just want to feel like it's good, like people care. But then after like many reps, when you've had some failures, some successes, a lot of mixed things, you're so in the disposition of what's next that you just don't like you're ready to go. You're ready to just keep moving.
Yeah.
You're ready to like move forward.
Yeah,
And
for what
maybe
it's worth, at least for me, is I have to make art as a way to self-care for my psyche because otherwise I'll fucking lose my mind. And so it really like I'm happy when it resonates with people, but it's actually the primary motive isn't even I hope people like this. The primary motive is I have to unburden my psyche of whatever the fuck it is that's pressing upon it, and I just have to do it. And then it's awesome that it's gotten to the point where it does resonate with people. But
yeah.
I'm curious if it's like that with you. Like, is it like almost like I have to? And I'm
Oh
glad
yeah.
that people
Oh yeah.
enjoy it. But
Yeah, for sure. And I remember trying to describe this sensation of, once you when you first start doing anything that could be conceived of as ritualistic, whether it's meditating, journaling, doing something creative, there's this weird feeling out process where it feels kind of foreign and you're like, what do I do? Why do I do
yeah,
this? Why like how but then after a while, again, after reps, you develop this weird psychological catharsis valve where it's like
exactly.
if you don't do that thing, now there's like this buildup that occurs. You're like, I got to do that. I really got to do that. And that's part of it for sure. But it's also, you and I are both in this weird position now where we've made our full time thing into exploring the very things that perk up our own wonder whiskers.
Right.
And it's like it's a pretty beautiful feedback loop to be in, man. It doesn't mean that it's not hard, it's not punishing, that there's not like some kind of mixing of practicality and necessity and interest and all of those things, because there obviously is. But it's pretty sensational and rare to be able to do anything related to what tickles your own soul and have that be what you just get to do with the vast majority of your time. And that also is just incredibly motivating because I mean, that's what I dreamed about for years and years, working a day job that did the exact opposite.
Same. Yeah, and it's that feeling of like, oh my God, I can't believe that I get to live like this is why my like the entire crux of my like profession as a teacher is to try to help people who have the same type of compulsion to be able to see like there is a way where you can not go insane and also be able to pay your bills. Like we live in a world where it is possible now. And yeah, that's like the only way that I can really hold the tension of the gratitude of the blessing.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I don't want to make it seem like we're just yanking each other off here, or we're like we're skipping over all the difficulty, because there is tremendous difficulty. And honestly, there were by the every single time without fail, dude, by the time I finish one of those solo videos, I'm on the fucking edge. I'm just like, I am done with this
Sure.
thing. I never want to see it, because
Yeah.
especially because I think most people know I'm doing 100% of everything. I'm all the images, all the video clips, all the editing, all the writing, all the research. And by the time you get done with it, you've done. You've seen it so many times. What you're just so sick of it. You're so done with it. You're just like, get this
Yeah.
out of here. You know. So it is. It does definitely like take a certain kind of patience and endurance and temperance. You know,
Endurance for sure. Yeah.
one of the four Platonic virtues.
Yeah,
Um,
there's this great photo from Austin Kleon in his
mm,
book, Steal Like an Artist. And it's one of my favorite drawings that I've ever seen. And it's basically like a graph of the artistic journey of
yeah,
creating a project. And it's like it starts out high and it's like, this is going to be fucking awesome. And then it just goes down and down and down and down until you get to the point where you're like, I'm a fraud. Everything I've ever made is shit. I don't know what I'm talking about and I need to go. I need to quit. And then if you can get past that point, it rises just a little bit and it's like, all right, it's fine. And then you release it and then you start over and you start
yeah,
back up at the top. And it's just that every single time.
absolutely, man. It's so weird how everything is so cyclical and so archetypal because it's like probably the stations of the hero's journey map right over the top of that. Like any kind of like narrative process probably fits beautifully over the top of that that whole psychological experience of creating something. But it really is, you know, we've talked about this before and I don't want to like recover this territory ad nauseum, but it's kind of it really to an extent is choosing what you want to toil for and suffer for or not, you know, and just being
Yeah.
able to choose is massively, to me it makes a massive qualitative difference in my own
100%.
mindset in my own life. I mean, I could not, yeah. I don't want to belabor it. I don't want to like sit here and be like, I could never work a job again because that just sounds so. It
For
just you
sure.
know, yeah.
For sure.
But it is true though. It is true though.
Yeah, and the thing that comes to mind is it's like, and this will weave into if there's anything still alive in you that you would want to talk about in regards to Plato's cave. But like for me, the frame that I'm in most of the time is Buddhist and like samsara and
Hmm.
trying to like wake up out of samsara. And I think that maps perfectly over to the, Plato's allegory. But there's interesting nuances that are different. But what I find is that it is actually through the process of trying to make art that is the most reliable practice that I currently have to create little moments of remembering, because the majority of my life, I have forgotten that I have forgotten. And
Right.
I'm in the game, I'm in the reactivity, I'm in the patterns. And there's something that's like really hard about having had remembered and then having a long period of forgetting that you forgot. And then you have a period of remembering again. And you're like, what the fuck is wrong with me? But having a daily artistic process, that I've like really for my mental health for like 10 years, it's the first hour, it's some combination of like dream work or writing to just try to say the truth to myself. It potentiates a more rhythmic micro remembering because I'll go the rest of the day and have forgotten that I forgot, and I'll
Right.
just,
Right.
I'll say something rude to Caitlin or I'll be triggered by an email. And then, but the next morning, because I get up and I start to write, it's like, and it's like just a little breath. And so I'm curious, like, do you have like a daily practice that kind of like helps you notice that you got lost in the cave? And if so, what does that look like?
Not as much as I should in that respect, but I do. What I really resonate with is that whenever you do settle into your practice, this kind of like what we were just talking about before, and it's that we have all these names for things, right? Journaling, meditating, do it, whatever. But the phenomenology of doing the thing is one of the things that is so rarely discussed, right? Like what is happening in your
Right.
mind? What kind of psychology is around that thing? Because
Yep.
one of the things in the beginning there isn't any. You're trying to it's just weird and awkward and it's like all novel and just
Yep.
clunky. But then when you get deeper into the process, there's like this whole grammar of settling into it and doing it, and when you get into those deeper, more engaged mindsets, you just start like a flow set state. You're not necessarily metacognating on anything in particular.
Right.
But what I do notice is that when you do slow down and you get out of the really reactive kinds of just like dopamine searching kinds of
Yeah.
consciousness, then those things just automatically start happening. All of those sorts of like mindful
Yeah.
behaviors. So I do have practices that I do for sure. I mean, we've talked about like sort of my weird mashup of ritual and meditation that I do, um but yeah, that is in terms of like the grammar of my day. There are like things that I always do, but I tend to kind of move the pieces around a lot. Like I know
For
I'm going to
sure.
go to the gym X number of days a week. Might be in the morning, might be in the afternoon. It really kind of depends on like what feels the most. I must do this thing. Like during the cave, like the cave creative sprint, I was just like that was the thing that I kept being like, if it's a question, I work on that. If it's a question, I work on that. But I can't do that all the time because it's just
For sure.
then because you start letting other things drop off and you're like, oh, I
For
just won't go to
sure.
the gym today or I won't do this today.
Yeah, one of the costs of feeling like I have a really awesome idea that I want to translate into some type of art is basically every other part of my life suffers. And I'm
Right.
still trying to learn how to have that balance because it's tough.
Dude, this is so cliche, but one of the other things that comes out of that Greek tradition is moderation. Like there's a document called the Pythagorean Golden Verses. And by today's standards, it's pretty obvious. It's just telling you not to overdo it in almost any respect and, be humble,
Yeah.
respect divinity, don't eat too much, don't drink too much, blah, 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 stuff like that. But when you really think about how important that is to just anchor yourself and your life and just realize that, like, just like you said, when I overdo it, these things suffer. And that's true of like everything in life. I think on a practical level, and I also think on a spiritual, psychospiritual, physical level, like
Right.
the whole being starts to suffer because from a Platonic standpoint, it's like it's outlined in the Republic, like what is it to be well? It's to have all three parts of your soul in balance. And if you're not living in a way where you're conducting and moderating,
Yeah.
something is in
Conducting.
dissonance. Like he uses,
Yep.
I think I told you this before, like he uses the word music, like the word that we would use
Love
for
it.
music. Um, so from that standpoint, something is dissonant, right? It's like there's a
Yeah.
dissonant little thing. And maybe at some points you need to allow things to get dissonant, but you don't want that to just be like how you go through your life.
Right.
It's like
Because like a part of really good jazz is how dissonant can you take the music and then still bring it back? Like
yeah,
that's actually like what jazz artists, how they kind of like flex to each other is like how far away from the core theme of the song can you go and then bring it back and everyone's like, oh fuck, you did
yeah.
it. And the other part to that I was just talking about with a friend yesterday was he was talking about how in Buddhism there is this set of teachings that talks about like for a bodhisattva, it is important not to rush your awakening
Hmm.
because if you rush it, you actually miss out on the depth of the suffering that becomes the capacity to which you can help other people. And so like the examples are like if you're like, a young hotshot and you really do the training and the practices and you reach that type of like stable attention when you're 20, you then become almost like a person who is unable to help other people. You become like a wisdom holder of that type of like mastery, but you don't know how to relate to people
Hmm.
because you didn't have children and you didn't go through all the pain that comes from trying to balance that with your occupations and your responsibilities to life. You don't know what it's like to be stuck in rumination for years and to feel stuck in the same patterns. And so they actually like give the advice of don't rush your awakening. Like appreciate the first part of life and like take on the suffering because it actually becomes the like it gives you a more full set of paint to
Right.
paint with as opposed to if you wake up too early you might only have like six colors.
It's the exact same thing with individuation, right? It's like we've talked about this so many
Right.
times that I think it's Murray Stein talks about it, but I think it might be Neumann. I'm forgetting now who initially came up with this three stage individuation thing. but there's just that kind of eager psychology where it's like, no, those first two stages, the matronly and patronly stages, like, and just to give the quick overview again, it's essentially you have to be a child, you have to be cared for, and then while that's happening, your ego develops. And then once your ego blossoms, you need to allow your ego to do its thing, and you need to live in the quote unquote paternal world. And that just means the world of competition, the world of figuring out who you are, the world of trying, of making a family, of building skills and trying to be successful. And then you have the context to understand what it is that you're turning away from and what you're turning toward. Because if you don't do that, it doesn't mean the same thing. And it gets back to this thing I was trying to communicate earlier of what it really feels like to do the thing. Because that's the hidden gem, I think, that we're all searching for with any of this stuff, is what is the thing that you can't tell me that I will experience if I do this? Because that's what, that's the unsaid thing of meditation. That's the unsaid thing of everything I was trying to get at in the Plato's Cave video, is that I can't tell you what a noesis of a blah, blah, blah level is, because it is being there. Like, it's like, what is it? What is the full experience of being in Boca Raton, Florida at 7:35 p.m. on August 26, 1981? Unless you were there and in that exact set and setting with that psyche, it's not the same thing. And I feel like that's this mercurial, just unspeakable sort of epiphany that everybody wants to reach, but then everybody wants to somehow shortcut to. It's like, no, the only way to reach it is to not shortcut. And I struggle with that all the time. I mean,
me too. Yeah.
I always think there's a way I'm going to outsmart it, or like take a shorter path and be like, yeah, that's for, and even if I don't say that out loud, there's a part of my psyche, at least, that's thinking that.
100%. Yeah. So a couple of things that comes to mind that I think are just beautiful things to point to is that the example you gave about, like, unless you're in that part of Florida on that date, you can't know. Yes. And the like lifelong invitation of the artist is paint the picture, write the poem, tell the story that gives people the opportunity to experience something that only you have touched. And to create an art piece about it is to actually like sacrifice the felt sense of that place so that you can give a map that can at least point to the people behind you. And like, I think about Rumi, like he touched states of consciousness that I have never known, but he dedicated his life to trying to write beautiful little pieces of maps that like a 16-year-old could stumble upon one day, and just there's a illumination that happens. And so that's just beautiful. The other thing that because I did a really long dream call for my community today, and it really just got me feeling into like one of the only things that I've read from Jung where he was giving a specific prescription of what not to do was, you cannot understand dreams by going to a dream dictionary. You cannot understand dreams by Googling, what does a cricket mean? Because it teaches the sin, if you will, of how to relate to your dreams, which is your dreams are an opportunity for you to have a living, felt connection to this intelligence, this other inside of you that literally creates works of art for you every day as worlds that are trying to teach you things or trying to help you feel things. And that the only way to ever know it is to commit to the practice. And it feels like the best teachers, I think, are the teachers who put their genius towards articulating the games to play or the practices to do, and just like spend their lifetime trying to refine the elegance of like, I already know I can't tell you. And if I trick you into believing that I can tell you, I now control you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like where cults get culty. But the beauty is if you articulate the game that you can play. And I think, one of the best games is art.
Mm-hmm. Especially now. I mean, given our list of options, because there's nothing that feels, I shouldn't say nothing, but this is something that I've struggled with as a person with a very strong pull toward like the mysteries, big existential and spiritual questions, is that it doesn't feel like there's anything that is true enough to believe in to an extent to where I'm willing to relinquish my intellect and all those other things to go full blown into it. And I think part of that's a problem on my part, right? But I also now that I've gotten older, if we would have had this conversation 5 years ago, and I shouldn't even say that because I'm 1,000% certain we did have this conversation 5 years ago. One of the things I always thought is that I would perennial be like a Robert Anton Wilsonian, wonder-facing, perennial agnostic mystic. Like I think something's going on. I don't think we can know. Maybe there's not even anything going on. Like we just can't know because we're stuck in this little POV of a human being. I still think that, but I've now warmed up enough to the Platonic outlook, meaning, philosophical realism. There is an objective reality that we can, to an extent, discern through a sharpened mind. I'm warm enough to that now that I would put myself in that camp versus the Robert Anton Wilson camp. And I know this is kind of tangential to what you were just
this
getting
is
at.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And I've got, yeah. So the thing that arises for me is that like Robert Anton Wilson saved my life because he introduced that type of playful agnosticism when I was stuck in a psychosis in my early 20s, where I was convinced of the most horrifying interpretations of life.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually his alchemy that broke apart my conviction of just the worst possible interpretations of life. But now where I'm at, what it feels like I see is this combination of I can't help but feel like the world that we are living in is the aftermath of a type of technology attentional atomic bomb.
Yeah.
And everyone is dazed and confused.
Yes.
And there's like, because of the environment of our time, it feels like there is an invitation to those who are willing to be foolish to move from a place of audacity to put forth anything that they genuinely think can help post catastrophe. And so it's like Robert Anton Wilson is the ultimate alchemy if you get stuck in a worldview. But we live in a time where, because of the rapid rise in technology and our fragmented collective mythos, that's not the problem that needs the remedy. We now need to figure out, like, how the fuck do you move forward to tomorrow inside of this schizophrenic renaissance that we're in? Because, like, just a perfect example is I posted a playful post 2 days ago where I took a clip from Terence McKenna talking about, like, if artists cannot find the way cannot be found. Rome is burning, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
and
I know that one. Yeah.
And I put on top of it me trying to take a nap, my brain, and then Terence McKenna saying that thing. And it has like caught the algorithm yesterday, where now it's being like 99% of the people who have seen it are people who don't follow me. And just to watch the degradation into schizophrenia of the comments, like it went from my friends laughing at it to people talking about how he was a CIA operative.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So that started to come in, and then it started to come in that he is actually a derivative of Plato, and that he didn't say anything original, and that this is exactly what Plato was saying. So he's both a CIA operative and he's just an echo of the greatest philosopher of all time.
Yeah.
And now what is starting to happen is just how, like, you know, he needs Jesus Christ, and everybody who is watching this needs to accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. And like, this is where we're at.
Yeah.
The call for me, at least as an artist, is it's like, God bless Robert Anton Wilson, but the evolutionary step after that is like, I really think that if he was our age and he was alive now, he would be, I don't think he would be doing what he did when he was a teenager, because he lived in a monolithic culture. And so he and his homies created Discordianism to put out, quote unquote, disinformation to help wake people up. I really think that if he were alive now with his homies and he was inside of this environment, he would be doing something of the opposite. He would be trying to create islands of coherence.
I agree.
Just to like help people like take a breath and like look around and just be like, what the fuck is going on? Are we okay? And so I really think that there's like a call to creating little pockets of coherence. And then we can start to think about like, what is the audacious next step? Because to your point, I think one of the things that the mysteries like suggests to us is just the catastrophic poverty of our educational system. Like, if the mysteries hadn't been, conquested by the Catholic Roman, fear that was just emanating from that source of power, like, what would it look like to be a child in the US? Because just real quick, a really cool story that really stands out is that when the Dalai Lama started to interact with Western cognitive psychologists back in the 80s, and they started to really like work with each other to see like, what is science support about Buddhism? They held a conference, and the Dalai Lama came to this conference, and there were a bunch of top tier psychologists there. And one of the questions he got asked was basically about rumination. Because in the West, the idea is the default mode network, which is what our brains do when we're just chilling, which is 50 to 90% of the time, depending on the studies you look at, that our default mode network is to ruminate. And ruminate is a self-referential type of story making that tends to create depression and anxiety because it's thinking about what you don't have, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. So they asked the Dalai Lama, why does the mind do that? And the Dalai Lama didn't understand the question, and he had to talk back and forth with his translators for a couple of minutes because he was confused. And then once he got it, he turned towards the audience like aghast and was like, why would you let the mind do that?
Yeah, you told me about this, yeah.
Oh, okay. And so the way the author broke that down was that in the East, it's just standard educational practice for children to learn how to notice what their mind is doing, and that's not a phenomenon that they see.
Yeah.
And that it's a phenomenon that if they are born, like if they're first generations in the US, they start to learn how to do that. And so that's just like, I really feel your call or your like pain the deeper you go into these mystery traditions and feeling like, fuck, I wish I had a teacher that actually knew how to do this. And I think a part of the like audacity of our time is it's like, we got to become those by just trying shit and teaching the truth. Yeah.
And finding like plugging the holes. Like one of the things I'm struggling with right now, just like this is a total side thing, and maybe this will lead somewhere interesting, maybe not, but I was never an analytically inclined person until I had to be for my previous day job. And I had to figure out how to be in that really organized, critical, process-driven mindset. And I always really struggled to do that. But one of the things that means in younger years is just completely disengaging when I was in like math class and stuff and just struggling in math. Yeah. And as you know now from watching the Plato's Cave video, my relationship and understanding of what math is has changed. And I see that now as a sort of weakness and as a path to new kinds of wisdom. And more importantly, man, the things that you can't say about it. What I was talking about before with the phenomenology, the experience of being there, the state of consciousness, dianoia, that is related to the finding of answers, that it really truly exists in an indisputable way, and using your mind to do that. Like this faculty of mind, the Greeks called dianoia. It's the third type of knowledge on Plato's divided line. And it's the first form of knowledge that where you leave the physical world and you go purely into the mental. And in this realm of the mental, there are these logical forms. You can interact with these logical forms. You can find answers to these forms. But one of the things we never talk about is the feeling in your mind and what's happening in your mind and where your mind is going when you're accessing those states of consciousness. Because we don't think about that as a state of consciousness, but it's absolutely a state of consciousness. And if you develop that within yourself, you're changing who you are and what you have access to with the sphere of your mind. And if you sharpen that sphere of your mind, you can go into these other modes of, it's not even that's what's so tricky is it is epistemological, and that it is a kind of not knowing, but it is also ontological. Like it's also a thing that exists and a kind of place that you're going
Right.
with and in the mind. And
Yeah. So
that's an example of a kind of teaching that I could do for myself, but at the same time, I'm like, I need to learn from others. But to your point before, like we live in a time that allows you to do that. Like I can go
yeah,
revisit 10th grade, 11th grade, like whatever math I want to revisit with the Platonic point of view. Would it be
100%.
better to have a teacher that was informed that way? Absolutely. But I also don't require it because I could approach it from that POV
Right.
myself.
Yeah. So what comes to mind, and let me know if this tracks with what you're saying, because where I've been in for the last few years has been Buddhism. What feels like a corollary to what you just described would be in Buddhism, if you first train through repetition the capacity to put your attention where you want it and keep it there, because that's
Mhm.
kind of the base requirement in order to translate, to interact with any of these logical forms, is you have to be able to maintain your spotlight. That once you do that, one of the you then have a whole menu of things that you can point that light at, and then you can get ontological insight. And one of the things would be into the law of impermanence. So once you hone the light, one of the things on the menu that you can then go really absorb and just understand as an ontological truth of reality is that everything that arises,
Mhm.
if you watch it, it came from a place outside of you, and it dissolves and it goes away. Everything, everything, period, full stop. And that if you hold your gaze on that long enough, for days and weeks and months, a thing changes inside of you, and you don't relate to the pain of life in the same way, because there is this ontological, it's really like you're updating your intuitions.
Mhm.
And the intuition is, whatever this is, one, I know that I can be with it because I've been with everything that's ever happened ever. And it will pass, and it will pass more quickly if I don't resist it.
Yeah.
So is that a corollary to what you were talking
Totally.
about? Cool.
Totally. But the thing that's interesting is it's like the thing, now that I'm becoming fluent enough in Platonism to really compare and contrast, because I also studied Buddhism in college. Like I have a decent grasp of all the a lot of the basics in Buddhism, but I'm not. I think I probably know more about Platonism at this point. But totally agree for sure. But I also would push back on that. We know for sure that there are things that are not transient. Like we know, like that's actually kind of part of the point of why math is important to a Platonist, because it's one of the first places you can go to prove to yourself that there are these immortal, unchanging concepts that are literally exerting control on our world right now. Like our world is
Yep.
following these, like, it's so crazy because it just saying it out loud is just like,
No, I completely agree.
it's stuff that everyone knows this, but when you just say it and you like sink into the reality of our mortal changing world is having immortal, unchanging properties inflicted upon it, and it's behaving according to those things.
100%.
And it's like that's one of those things that when you really sink into that, it's just like, wow.
It changes your cosmology. And the thing that I want to articulate is, so I love this. And so, because what this does is this helps me articulate more clearly what it is that I understand from Buddhism, and that the law of impermanence is a function of samsara. So it's anything that arises through your sense apparatus. So thoughts, emotions, your actual perception, anything somatic. So anything that's arising through the perceptual system is subject to the law of impermanence.
Yep.
But the law of impermanence, as it applies to the world of samsara, that's a Platonic form. That's an unchanging. The law of impermanence is not subjected to
right. That there you go.
Right.
Yeah. So it's like, it's totally true on, remember in the divided line, how there's like the line where you leave what's called doxa, which is the bottom two ways of knowing. That's when you leave what they call the world of being and becoming, because
samsara.
Everything below that line is the world of being and becoming. And that's totally akin to that. Everything in
samsara.
in that like churning wheel of motion, or things that are playing within, again, to use a Platonic terminology, like the realm of the world soul, where it's just this
100%.
like recycling machine of matter and soul and all of this stuff that's constantly being recycled and repurposed. But yet, yeah, we do that is something I would like to hear the Buddhist perspective on, because I don't know enough about their stance toward the unchanging. And maybe it's a matter of interest, because Buddhism is obviously primarily dedicated to cessation of suffering and very practical matters that are ways to deal with your own mortality. Whereas what I'm talking about is a bit more conceptual and meta. But I think that there is feedback between both.
For sure. And it's just worth speaking to is that there are many lineages of Buddhism. There's three main ones. And like, I thought I understood Buddhism like well enough to believe I understood it. And then in the last 2 years, through working with John Churchill, he basically has been pointing me to books. And then I've been reading these books, and it's just been absolutely blowing my mind. But the cessation of suffering, most of what has been translated into like popular culture in the West as it relates to Buddhism, is what would be akin to like teaching a surfer how to get on the board. And that once on the board, there's a bunch of like games you can play. But what has been translated to the West, because no one knows how to get on the board, is that that's what people think the whole thing is. But for example, in Mahayana Buddhism, there's a whole bunch of really esoteric, potent, magical, and this is just how the West would interpret these practices, things you can do now that you can stand on the surfboard. And like, the main thing is I just wanted to speak to, like, when we talk about Buddhism, it feels just right to speak that there's multiple different lineages, and you're completely right. It's about what is the point of emphasis.
Yeah.
Because there's like Dzogchen, which is the point of emphasis is to be able to create the view in your mind, to notice the great perfection that always has been, always is, and is the birthright of a mind that has the capacity to see it. But then there's branches of Buddhism where it's like, okay, now that you can get on the surfboard, let's go get tutored by one of the 5 great gods.
Right.
And one of the gods is the god that will teach you how to heal all of your trauma. And there's rituals about how to sit with that god and talk to that god and like become that god and become the consort of that god. And that's how that you get through trauma.
Yeah.
And then they have a god about how to get clear creative insight. And you can work with that god as a mentor. And so they just have a bunch of cool shit that you can start to do once you get on the surfboard.
Yeah, yeah, and you're starting to actually remind me now, because this is a conversation we've dipped in a couple times, and I absolutely love dipping into it again. Don't get me wrong, but now you're starting to hint here at the power of some of these immortal things in your own life. Because another way to say precisely what you're saying is that in these devotional kinds of initiations that you do in, I don't remember which sect of Tibetan Buddhism it is, but you're talking about creating a relationship with a type of archetype or god
100%, 100%.
that is a specific thing, that is a specific unchanging quality, and you're trying to allow that thing to inhabit your psyche, or you're trying to merge your psyche with it. And yeah, that definitely is. And then Dzogchen is too. And here's what's crazy, speaking to the diversity in Buddhism, those are both different schools of just Tibetan Buddhism.
Right.
So this is just Tibetan Buddhism. And then Mahayana is like the umbrella that goes over the top of almost every single major school of Buddhism in the world today. And then you have like these older kinds of Buddhism that are under this like Theravada umbrella, which still exists to some degree, but way less. Like the Mahayana it's almost like this is not a one-to-one. But if anybody doesn't know what we're talking about at all, a really dirty way to think about it is like, in the same way that there used to be a Catholic Church, and then there was a Reformation, and now there's all these other exploded out types of Christian churches. Theravada is like the old guard. Mahayana was sort of like this updated version so that more people could join and more people could wake up within this life without just being, literally just being a monastic that's either like, okay, you want to be a Buddhist? That means shave your head, go sit, and like that's right. You're just trying to do that full time forever as an ascetic monk. And then the Mahayana movement comes along and it allows people like me and Erick to like, be lay people and also still interact with these ideas and to whatever degree.
Right.
And there's so much more to it, obviously. But just with that context, there's so much going on. And that is really interesting. And it's making me think of, I'm pretty sure you said this before the recording, and maybe you're not read up enough on this to want to talk about it yet, but that whole idea of the potential actual historical relationship between some of the Greek ideas and some of the Eastern ideas is incredibly interesting. And that's something I definitely want to do
100%
research on and talk more about whenever you're ready to talk about it.
Yeah. So I'm going to connect you with John Churchill, and you guys can talk about it on the podcast, because for me to attempt to talk about it would just to be incredibly irresponsible. But the core thing that I just learned from him the other day that is just absolutely mind-boggling is that he thinks there is very strong historical and academic evidence that Mahayana Buddhism is a result of Platonism making its way into like the India continent and then being transmuted through the Buddhist cultures that were alive at the time. And that even some of the Buddhist like teachers were sent to Alexandria to try to absorb as much as they possibly could from that culture. And that a lot of what we know about Mahayana Buddhism was actually, it's the creative child of the alchemical intermeshing of basically the best of Greek culture and the best of Indian culture.
Yeah, and I totally think that that's plausible. I'm just, as you were saying this, I'm trying to look up like, are there any books that seem to be on this topic in particular? Did he tell you the name of a book?
Yeah, so he sent me one, and I can send it to you. Actually, I'll just pull it up real quick because this is what we're doing.
I did just find a book that's literally called Parallels Between Platonism and Mahayana Buddhism. But
that is exactly the book.
By Oscar Ichazo.
Yep. That's
interesting. It's another one of these gems, baby. You and I were just talking about how there are these books on Amazon with like no reviews. And for all it
Dude,
might be like the most important, most insightful book ever. This might be another one of them. It has 3 reviews.
that's yeah. Like Sustainable Happiness is a book that almost nobody has read, and it is
Yeah.
one of the most electrifying books that I have ever read. And also Process and Event is one of
Mm.
the most electrifying books I've ever read in my entire fucking life. And I think when I got the book in January, I went on Amazon and I think there were 0 reviews for it.
Oh, dude, that's why this guy's name sounded familiar to me. So Oscar Ichazo is the originator of integral philosophy.
Wow.
So there it is. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I'm gonna have to get my hands on that book. But yeah, I think I've gotten accused a couple of times about being, overly interested in the Greeks and under interested in, Indian wisdom, Middle Eastern. I am equally interested across the board. And I want to say I want to make something clear that I don't know if I have ever specifically said, but I think that there is like a true line of wisdom that transcends every single culture. And I wanted to bring this up before when you were talking about Rumi, because if you want to know what it looks like to live in full time in the influence of the form of the good, read Rumi. Like that devotional mindset of how absolutely beautiful everything is all the time, and that you are just swimming in underappreciated divine harmonic beauty at all times. Like that is exactly it. That is exactly that mindset that you can achieve in a way that transcends all those like lower levels of the divided line. It's not about believing it. It's not about saying the right things. It's not about like any of that stuff on the lower level of the divided line or the physical world. It's about literally finding a way to get your consciousness to inhabit, have that noesis, that
Yeah.
direct knowing of the form of the good in to the point where it's like shining on your entire personal psyche. And
100%.
he's a Sufi. So I definitely believe that this runs throughout all of
For
the
sure.
great mystical traditions of the world, and that there are different routes to getting there,
Right.
and that unsaid thing of what it's like to be in that state. If Plotinus and him sat down together, I have no doubt that they would not come to the exact same conclusion.
Without question. I mean, if the good is the good, it's everywhere and everyone has access to it. And the question that comes up that I think would actually be really like alive and real and also helpful to your audience is like, in order for you to have gotten to this point in your life, it is a given that you had to start to find some practices and some behaviors that bring you into attunement with the good. Like for me, I I know the fucking day that it started, and
Hmm.
it started with me doing The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, where I was committing to attempt to articulate the truth to myself. And like, I remember the day that I started because it changed the course of my entire life, and I still do it today. I'm curious if you can pinpoint, like, what was that moment that you found a practice or something that started to bring you into alignment with the good, because like Rumi is a master,
Mm-hmm.
but in order for you to even have gotten to this point, you've touched it. And I'm curious, what was that first moment where you felt like, whatever that feeling is, like, this is where I'm supposed to be going and I'm terrified, but I'm going to do it.
I can't pinpoint the first moment, but there are a few that stick out in my mind for sure. Like I have like clear memories of several times of pretty much just mystical experiences, just going on walks. And I remember one, just I was like 20 years old walking around my college, and just like that feeling of just being washed over by, oh my god, and it just almost, it feels like the entire world is just like a giant choir of harmonic synchronicity or something like
Yeah.
that, that's
Wow.
just like, oh, like all, like, I
Yeah.
mean, the type of feeling that normally takes like, you know psychedelic intervention or something to
Yep.
achieve. But like sometimes you just get hits of that, and you
Yeah.
can either just be like, huh, that was weird, and just like move along, or you can store those memories as these like precious jewels and wonder about them. And even though you can't remember, like that is a noesis for sure. Like that is a kind of knowing of something that
Right.
you can just get lucky to stumble into, like through almost doing nothing, through just paying attention, through just
Yeah.
looking around and allowing your mind to really be like, whoa. Like, and you can do that looking at a tree. You can do that. I'm not saying I can do it on command. I'm saying I think it's definitely possible that you
Right.
can do it in that way. But I think another thing is the slow. It's kind of the opposite of the way you were describing it, in that there was a book, there was doing the artist's way. It's almost like the peeling back of the layers of the onion slowly, year after year, until the layers have started to pile up. Maybe the onion's a bad example, but it's like maybe like you're traveling a maze or something, and you don't know, and you're just following your intuition and following your intuition, and it feels like I have no clue what I'm doing. But then after a while, there's like some kind of coherence, and there starts to feel like there's a reason I went this way. There's a reason I chose that. There's a reason I chose this. And then you stumble across a book like Soul's Code, which is a great tie-in here because he's appealing to Plato's Republic throughout that entire book with the myth of Ur and the personal daimon and all that stuff. Which, to boil it down for the billionth time on the show, is, yeah, you did choose those things for a reason. It's because you have a purpose. There is like a pattern that you came into the world with. There is a personal guardian, whatever you want to call it, daimon, genius, that you came into the world with, that knows in a non-linguistic, qualitative kind of way, that gives you the when you're not supposed to do something, and gives you the peace when you do the something.
Yeah.
And it's very tricky because you can fool yourself into thinking your personal bias is the voice of your daimon. Like,
For
I
sure.
like playing video games and drinking Mountain Dew and eating Funyuns. Like, no, that's obviously not really in line with what you came here to do, I don't think.
Yeah. So the thing that comes to mind, there's a couple, and I'll just throw some seeds out and you can pick which one you want to pick up. One is one of the things that like a epiphany moment was when I first learned about NLP
Mm-hmm.
and their idea of modeling, which is just basically anything that anyone has ever done. If you have the right view of consciousness, you can see that it is a sequence of behaviors that increase the probability of a certain outcome. And so if anyone has ever done anything, deconstruct their sequence of behaviors. So part of me is curious, like when you say like peeling back the layers of the onion over years or learning to follow your intuition, part of me is curious, what was your specific sequence of behaviors and cognition that made up the game that you found that you were playing with yourself? And what my life was like is I didn't know I was playing the game until years after. And then I can look back and like extract out like, oh, that's what I was doing. And I didn't even know it. So that's one of the seeds I want to throw out.
Mm-hmm.
The other seed that I think is really interesting is when you and I had our first podcast together, I think we both intellectually could talk about the daemon and having a calling. But if I'm remembering correctly, both of us did not have that Jungian, like when he's asked, do you believe in God?
Mm-hmm.
And he laughs and he's like, no, I don't believe. I know.
Mm-hmm.
And you can feel in every fucking fiber of his being that there is no fronting. It is like he's trying to contain the hilarity of the question.
Right.
It feels like, I'll at least speak for myself, I'm at the point now where when it comes to having a daemon and having a calling and that you chose to come here, there is a part of me that can laugh like Jung and say, no, I don't believe that. I know. But that wasn't me when we had our first conversation. I'm curious, are you at that place now with the calling and with the like whisper? And If so, can you like pinpoint when that changed? And if not, just if you would talk about that.
I really do think for me, it's a gradual rooting into that reality. I mean, there are definitely moments where you are certain of it. You know, I mean, I've had
Right.
like even that example I gave before, obviously, you know, altered states of in peak experience states where it really feels like you're in that exact same uh transcendent fractal omni harmony that I was talking about before.
That's a great word.
But for me, I think it is gradual because obviously we're all oscillating in and out of
I agree.
moods, of
Yeah.
mindsets, of beliefs, of, you know, thinking maybe you're telling yourself a fairy if you're a critically thinking person. But what is so fucking incredible about and why I'm so dedicated to helping push Platonism out now is it doesn't matter what you think about it. You don't have to believe anything. There's nothing to believe. It's use your mind, sharpen your mind to the greatest degree that you can with only the aim of finding the truth. And that requires some intangible things. I'm not saying that it's purely learning math and stuff like that. No, like there is some, it needs to be, and I think I said this in the video, that the lower tier ways of knowing. So if people have not watched the video, there's a famous divided line analogy given in Plato's Republic where there are 4 kinds of knowledge. And the kinds of knowledge essentially go from the hierarchically lowest to the hierarchically highest. The lowest is akasia, the second is pistis, the third is dianoia, the fourth is noesis. So akasia is usually like opinions and conjecture. And then that in the cave allegory, see, this is where it's like, just watch the damn video if you haven't. In the cave allegory, this is the images like of the shadows on the wall. Then when you go up to pistis, this is usually translated as faith or belief. And this is akin to, in the allegory, the object passing in front of the flame that casts the shadow. And then dianoia is like your capacity to do math and logic. And then this is getting out of the cave and seeing either reflections or seeing objects in the physical world for the first time. And then noesis is the highest kind of knowing. And this is gazing directly on the sun and having this, what they would say, like an intuitive apprehension of a form or a state of consciousness or something. So you don't have, there's nothing you have to believe for that. You literally can just experience that, yeah, these are modes of knowledge. They pretty much encompass everything that's possible to experience as a human if you understand them sufficiently. And what happens if I place a greater emphasis on the higher kinds of knowing and I try to make less and less space for those lower kinds of knowing, and not eliminating them, because it's not about eliminating them. It's understanding that, hey, if I'm obsessed with the projections of the world, the opinions of the world, the conjectures, the political part, whatever, all those things, watch what happens to my mind. If I'm not concerned with those and I'm organizing my life toward these other higher things, what happens then? And it's not like you're going to go to hell or something if you don't do it this way or do it, but you are going to determine the path of what your mind's going to do and how your psyche's going to develop and how your intellect is going to develop. And we've somehow gotten ourselves into this idea that intellectual knowing and spiritual knowing are like these two different things. But this is the first way of knowing that I've ever come across that to me completely unites those things in a way where there's no dogma. There's no, there's dogma, I guess, because it is saying like, this is how you do stuff. But it's not the kind of dogma where, like I was saying before, you'll be punished or, whatever.
Yeah. So the thing that comes to mind is a part of the magic of the 2 books that saved my life, which were Prometheus Rising and The Artist's Way, is both of those were written by artists who had walked a specific path, knew the qualia of noesis that they wanted to transmit, knew that they couldn't transmit it through language. And so they introduce a game at the very beginning of the book. For the artist's way, the game is the daily pages. And she articulates very clearly, this is just play this game for 12 weeks. I promise you, just play this game and I'll see you on the other side. And with Prometheus Rising, the very first game he introduces is the one about looking for a coin.
Yeah.
Now, this wouldn't work as much now because we're moving into the, new world order of everything being currency online. But
post coin.
But he gave a game at the very beginning, a super simple game that he, as a game designer, created to elicit a certain type of noesis. What I can feel like, if I could be so audacious to project this onto you, is it feels like there is what wants to come out of you as a game that that one, you put yourself through first, because just to be in integrity, which you are, you're not going to tell people to do something that you haven't done. But you don't tell people afterwards. You just tell the story of you putting yourself through this game.
Yes.
And so has a game like that arisen in you as you've worked on this, as like an intuition of like, you know what, for the next month, I'm going to do this game because I want to try to touch this type of noesis that I feel is coming through my study with Platonism. So has something come through?
In a very meta way, yes. Like, because I think that's kind of what my whole life is, and what all of like this platform is it's sort of trying to be like essentially, like, the podcast is an extraordinarily open-ended ramble session, right? And there's a through line only in terms of like who I'm talking to and the subjects that we're talking about, right? But there is no game per se. So I guess the unspoken thing then is that the game is whatever we continuously come back to and discuss, and the ideas that interest me so much that I can't leave them alone, and then I can keep returning to them and then talking to people who have more insights and more insights. So in a way, I think that this is that game. But I also am thinking now that anytime you come across a really powerful myth that is so true that you're like, oh shit, this has to be built into the operating system of my game, or this has to be built in to part of the lore of my own game because it's just too compelling. Those things, I think, come on board to my game too. Like Source Code is obviously one for both of us that was like so impactful, that this platonic daimon, like the psychological, the psychologization of that idea. And when I say that, I don't mean taking it out of its context. I mean understanding that it fits into that context as well, and then digging further and finding like, oh, this is from Plato's Republic that he's getting this. This is from the myth of Ur, that whole thing. It really is kind of game building, right? It's like we are building a sense making game in the most high stakes sense, right? Because it's the thing that animates you enough to want to individuate, right? It's like, because without the rails of the game, like without the Candyland board of your own individuation, what's the context, right? Like what's the path? What's the thing? Yeah.
The reason I ask is because like the way that I'm orchestrated or put together is, it feels like, and maybe it's because of the family system that I came from, but the family system that I came from is everyone was just in so much pain. And for some reason, I didn't experience the same type of like fundamental painful disposition towards life. And I felt guilt for a long time. And then like now as an adult, like my artistic passion almost is to try to look back at things that I have done that seem like they have helped me navigate the game that causes so much pain for people that I know deeply and closely who are suffering. And then to try to articulate like as attractively, just like entertainingly, but also concisely, so that they can, if they want to, start to get out of pain as soon as they possibly can. Because again, maybe it's clearly a part of my personal makeup, because there's a disposition towards life where it's not a catastrophe, and that lens is true. But there's also a lens where I just can't help but see the sea of suffering that's just
Yeah.
happening, and that, like, you and I are in a position where we have found a way to play the game of life, where we've gotten to move through some of the fundamental pain creating sufferings that, people one doorstop away from us haven't gotten out of. And you have such a unique life that I'm like, the game designer in me is just interested in to, like, see, because what I imagine is, like, I don't know the personal relationship that you have with your audience, but I imagine that just the function of how people work is that there's a lot of people who feel a sense of like peace and camaraderie and just hearing and seeing the way that you go about doing the things that you do. And, like, I guess I'm just curious, and maybe it's just not here, but trying to explicate the model so that people who want to could attempt to replicate, to get their version of what they see that you have that resonates with them. And so it sounds like what I've heard so far is, like, listen to your interest and dive into it and do whatever you have to find the people who will talk with you about it. And then learn how to have those conversations in a way where it can eventually start to support itself, so that you can dive deeper and deeper into the mysteries. And that's how I stay sane. Like, that's me trying to speak as you. It's like for me, I had a psychosis in my early 20s. I had to figure out how to be in the world and stay sane, and also help in a way where it feels like, like, with great blessing comes great responsibility. And yeah, so that's just where those questions are coming from.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. And I really think that there's no new thing emerging. I think it's just that it's getting more coherent, and I'm getting better at understanding what models point to the thing. Like, individuation is really the main one. And understanding individuation in the context of, like, Hillman's soul's code and the ontological and epistemological map that Platonism provides. I think adding all of those things together, like, again, Jung, Hillman, Platonism, those things create, and definitely Campbell too. They all collectively create I think, the best possible game board. And I'm not saying that you even need to understand these things at a crazy PhD level. I think that if you go to that length with these things, they're just going to keep yielding insight after insight after insight, and you'll find yourself deeply sucked in if you're interested in this stuff. But even if you don't, even if you just get the sort of, like, broad strokes of what they're all proposing, I think that that is the most important foundation for self-understanding and contextualizing myself that I've ever found. Is the combination of those few things has just been totally indispensable. And I think that there is, like, where it gets just straight up, like, I can't tell you, and it sounds almost cliche and new agey to say, is there is a lot of just self-trust involved. You've got to trust that you can figure it out, and you also have to trust that you may not figure it out, and you may crash and burn and fuck up, and then you'll figure it out from there.
Right.
Like that, and figuring it out does not necessarily look like success in a conventional way. That's
Yeah.
one of the other things that's so hard to acknowledge and wrap your mind around. I mean, dude, Jung was clear about, like, if you want to individuate and you haven't, like, burned your entire life down at some point, like, are you really? Are you really? Because if it's been easy enough where you didn't have to just, like, feel like you were a rotisserie pig spinning over spinning over, like the heat of your own soul being barbecued by the fucking collective soul eating force of society, then are you really,
Now, the thing that is worth mentioning is Jung married one of the richest women in his country, who was
didn't know that.
Oh, so this is, I think, like a super huge, big, important point. Like, Jung's a genius. He's my favorite human that has lived. Let's give him all of his roses. But he never had to talk about the relationship between the individuation process and financial security.
That is true.
Because he married into one of the richest families in his country. And a part of his tension with Freud is that Freud had to work his motherfucking ass off to basically be middle class. And Jung did not. And one of the things that, like, what I personally see is, like, I see so many people who are called to the individuation process who have no map whatsoever about how to synthesize that with the fact that you have to figure out your financial security. And those two things, there is a frame that if you just grow up into and just accept the brutal facts of life and mature, you can mix those two things, where your individuation process can be orchestrated in a way where you can pay your bills. And Jung never had to speak to that because he never saw it. And I see it as such a, like, hole currently in, because just to be frank, I'm in a position where I don't have to worry about money. And there's a huge guilt that is, like, a part of that thing, because I came from a family that money was a god, and the god didn't like us,
right?
And it's like, it was a thing. And I'm in a position now where it feels like the best thing that I can do for artists, or just for people who give a fuck about the individuation process, is, to help them play games that can feed their individuation process, but can also fucking buy them groceries. And so, like, to bring that to your point about Jung, and, like, if the individuation process doesn't burn your entire life up, maybe you're not doing it right. But, like, you navigated for years the tension of your creative calling and the fact that it didn't make sense to go all into it, And I think that, like, those parts of our journeys as artists, I think, are something that we have the most resistance to talking about and teaching and just sharing about. But it is actually, like, the way the meat was made,
Right.
And it's like,
Oh, yeah.
Like, one of the things that I am starting to really connect to through this practice that I'm starting to do with people, where we're doing deep work sprints with each other, working on our creative process, is I'm realizing most artists don't talk about the bipolar schizophrenic part of the artistic process. Yeah. There's the artists who figured it out somehow, and they're the icons on the fucking, stars. And then there's the unspoken wasteland of, the mentally ill, the broke, the resentful artists who couldn't figure out that process. And that, like, one of the things about having talent is people who have innate talent tend not to be great teachers, because they don't understand the nuances, because they take it for granted. And people who don't have that same talent are like, what the fuck do you mean just jump off the back and twist in the air and land on your feet?
Yeah, this is like the monk who gets enlightened when they're 20 that you were talking about, that didn't have to, like, go slowly through it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so, like, it feels like, in the same way that in the artistic process, there is this fucking schizophrenic bipolar aspect of the creative process that most artists just have to figure out on their own. And it's like, today, God kissed me on the forehead and I see the vision of the future. And then the next day, it's, God was never real. I'm a fucking fraud. But then if you don't give up and you come back the next day, it's like, oh, I remember how to write. And so to carry that over to, like, the weird game that you and I are now playing, is like, we had to figure out the path of dealing with the brutal facts that we live in a capitalistic culture, but I have a soul. And my soul is, for whatever reason, it's so relentless that it's not going to let me not focus my entire life to it. And so, you know, the task for 10 years was to try to figure out, how the fuck do I stay sane and connected to my integrity and my dharma, but, you know, be able to afford groceries and eventually be able to fucking pay for a wedding and to, like, you know, X, Y, and Z. And so, yeah, I just wanted to really call out that God bless Jung, but he didn't have to talk about that problem.
For sure. Yeah. And I think part of what my unspoken motivation for not showing how the meat is made, so to speak, is I think there's something kind of gross about being too personal or getting too like, woe is me, here's what's going on in my personal life that I'm struggling with. Like every now and then I'll hint like, yeah, this has been like challenging, but I don't like to. It's like, you know, the cliche version of it is the constant oversharer on social media who's constantly writing these kind of posts about like every little tiny thing that's wrong in their life. And I don't ever want to be that person. But then, of course, the flip side of that is there's all this unseen grinding and all this unseen, you don't know what it takes to get the thing that got published that the people did see. And that is a problem, I guess, to a degree. Like if you are one of those people that Erick and I are talking about hypothetically, that's trying to figure out, how do I merge my creativity with something that could make me money, which is probably a subset of the audience, but not even close to the whole audience. But yeah, I mean, there's stark realities that come with that. To Erick's point, definitely just slogged through a job I fucking hated for years. There's still a lot of slogging involved in this, even though I'm super stoked to be doing it and I wouldn't change anything about it other than to keep doing it and hopefully keep growing. But there get used to that idea. I mean, you don't have to be David Goggins, but you do have to like develop I don't give up. Like we talked about this last time for a while. Like if you can find that thing in yourself, that's not the, man, if this person does this for me, it's going to be so great. Oh man, if I can just get this from this person, then I'm going to do. No, get rid of all the I need this from other people ideas. You got to figure out how to do it yourself. And you have to know that you're going to hit roadblocks, and you have to know that you're going to be like, I don't know how to do this. And then you either figure it out or you give up, and it's completely on you. And if you can really settle into that, that is like the beginning of finding the most powerful magical tool that exists in the entire fucking universe, at least from a human POV, because that is the wand. Like that is, you know, in the hero's journey of the tarot, that's the transition from fool to magician of Arcana 1, right? It's like going from 0 fool that doesn't know anything to Arcana 1. You learn some magic techniques that now allow you to start the journey. And if you can look at it in that way, that's huge. If you give up right away, or if you think that your success is contingent on some other person doing some shit for you, trust me, speaking from experience, you're in for a lot of disappointment and heartbreak. And that's okay. Make them like, there's many mistakes you're going to have to make for yourself, but just know that's a fact. What I just said, it's a fact. And whether it takes you 10 years to realize, I shouldn't have relied on that person, or I should have done that, or should have done this, that just slowed me down. Like, you'll know that I'm right. Like, eventually, trust me, you'll know that I'm right. And I speak from many, many different times that I will not get into because they're just boring and personal. But all those things just slowed me down, dude. All those things just slowed me down 100%.
Yeah. And the thing that comes to mind is what really stands out from going from the fool to the magician is the fool in its purest light is the part that always says, yeah, maybe I'll just go with the flow. Yeah, maybe. And it's a type of enlightenment if you've gone through all of the stages and you can come back to it. But what the fool lacks is directionality, agency, and frankly, creativity. It's not, now it's quote unquote creative in how it can respond to life. But like my big, like personal like maturity that I had to go through this last year is basically going from the fool archetype, which I've been incredibly lucky. I basically have just talked about what I've loved about and have gotten lucky when it comes to finances. Like never had to actually try. But there's a point about like, because
well, you did work a shitty job for, like, we should let people, like, if anybody hasn't listened to our raps before, it's not like you just like popped out into billions of dollars or anything like that.
No, for sure. But what I meant was because of my family relationship to money, my relationship to it is I'm just not going to look at it. I'm going to be excellent. I'm going to train. I'm going to help people. And I'm just going to trust that whatever happens, happens. But now that like pregnancy and fatherhood are on the horizon, a part of like just what has organically come through me through my, like darkness retreats really is where it came through is as to grow the fuck up, Erick, learn how to orchestrate, which is create a vision, create a strategy, be in integrity, but produce things so that you can provide for your family and just grow the fuck up, because like I never wanted to talk about money because one of the things that I would offer is my spicy take is I don't think it's a subset of your audience. I think it is literally 100% of your audience. I think everyone has a call to individuate, period. And that to live in our culture, part of that call to individuate is you have to figure out how to dance with money, period.
For sure.
And so I don't think that it's a subset. I think it's just about have you gotten to the point where you've admitted to yourself that you have a calling? And it's a subset that has. And then once you've admitted that, have you admitted to yourself your current relationship with how you're able to feed that calling? Because the truth is, a lot of people, I think, this might be unpopular, but I think a lot of people rationalize their lack of agency when it comes to producing financial security for themselves. And then I think that that's bullshit. I think we live in a new world. And I think that with the Shimmer, that's actually, there's just so much more freedom for artists who are willing to grow up. And I think everybody actually is an artist. Now we could define what that means because I have a friend who is like a quote unquote high art creator, like makes things that go into museums. And she would say that everybody's not an artist. But my healthy debate with her is it's like, we live in a time now where the people who are capable of the quote unquote highest art 50 years ago, the game was to try to get into a museum. But I really think that like that game is dead, in my opinion. I think that like if those artists turn towards the street, like putting, like imagine someone who could be in the Guggenheim if they put a mural on a street wall that every time someone walked by it, it would wake them up. That's a type of like a guerrilla act. Whereas I forgot where I heard this idea, but once I heard it, it haunts me. And it's like all of the museums in the world, most of them are the byproduct of the most wealthy people creating nonprofits to basically hide their money and to not have their money properly taxed. And they create prisons to put in the most explosive art in the world to contain it. So that, and that's a kind of a conspiratorial thing, but it's a juicy idea. But it's like
buying art and hoarding it for investments, right?
Right. And like one of the things that a lot of people don't know, I didn't know until I watched the movie Tenet, was that, and this is an actual thing, there are storage facilities all over the world that are only for the most wealthy. And they buy the best art in the world and they don't even make it into museums. They just sit in these storage units because they're a type of asset that is not taxed properly or not taxed sufficiently. And I was talking to my friend who is this high artist that is like in museums, and she's like, there are warehouses in New York that are full of centuries of the best art that has ever fucking been made. That's the type of art that when you saw it, you would have the type of experience that you had when you were going on a walk, and you would,
Right.
and they just sit there and no one sees them. And there's something about that that like makes me want to cry and yell.
Right.
You know?
It's so goofy. Yeah, it's one of the weird casualties of capitalism because like to your point, there's a huge incentive to do this because it's a way to spend money and buy an asset that will appreciate. And like to your point, you don't get taxed on it because you actually spent money to get the thing. It's super weird. I mean, that's a great example of how our incentive structure is really goofy.
Right. And I think the thing to highlight here is, so a really important cognitive trap that we all do is when we have resistance to something that is a part of our maturity, but we don't want to do it, we jump to the most extreme version of that. That's, we obviously don't want to be. And then we focus on that so we don't have to do the thing. And so the example, because I see this almost literally every day in my community when people talk about what they're currently stuck on. And the example is, if you're a trainer and you work at a gym and you're trying to sell someone to fucking start working out, and they're obese and they're overweight, one of the most common rebuttals that you'll get is, I don't want to look like, a fucking jacked meathead.
Right.
And the proper response to that is in some way to calmly and non-disparagingly reflect, you do not need to worry about that.
Mm-hmm.
That is an outcome that you will probably never get because it will take an insane amount of consistency at a intensity that I'm not asking you to do. You've never worked out 2 days in a row. So you don't need to worry about overtraining or looking like, Arnold Schwarzenegger. You just got to get to the gym every day for the next 2 weeks and you're going to feel better in every part of your life. And the thing that's so interesting is to get the average person to do something like that, because it's anytime we change a habit, there's a bunch of internal resistance. What gets people to do it is you sell them a story. And I don't know what other word to use other than sell. But like, this is a thing that I see in what I've been teaching, is that the type of stuff that I've put myself through, because if I didn't do it, the outcome was insanity. So I was properly motivated to do hard shit for a long time. I have never been able to get any of my friends, other than one, to do basically any of the things that I've learned how to do that have helped me. But when I put it out there and I charge money for it, people not only want to do it, they actually do it. And I've seen and I watch it help people. And just as an example, the previous class that I just taught, I gave it at a massive discount and free on some examples to my closest friends, to like 3 of my closest friends. The only people who didn't complete the class, literally, this is not an exaggeration. The only people who didn't show up to the class were my closest friends who either got it for free or got it at a discount. And so there's this interesting psychological thing where if you have figured out anything that can help, that has gotten you out of pain, if you give it away for free, almost no one will actually do it because of the internal resistance to changing a behavior is higher than the felt sense of value of the information before you try it. And so to kind of like bring this back, this is why I've been super obsessed with trying to come up with really easy to play games, because they're almost like Trojan horses. Mm-hmm. Like this thing about the Dharma sprint and death cookie thing. Like, I'm just throwing that out there and it's catching people because it's a really simple game that very quickly helps them feel good. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And like,
we didn't define those in this podcast. Like for people who have listened to our previous shows, the Dharma, I don't know if you even.
The Dharma sprint is basically deep focused work with other people with clear intentions where you basically don't talk while it's happening and you share what it was like afterwards. But it's basically co-working, but with really clear boundaries. Like, don't talk to me while we're doing this, but then afterwards we can share what the experience was like with each other. This is the first time I've ever gotten my close friends to do deep work. Like, I was just writing about this the other day. If you don't get deep focus every day, you are just missing out on the abundance and the joy of life.
Totally.
And most people are. And I haven't been able to talk any of the people closest to me into trying that almost ever since I've been doing it, which is like 10 years. I've had one or two, and they become my closest friends because they get it. And then the death cookie thing is basically, you just take a moment at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day and feel into, of the open loops that I have in my mind, what is the one I have the most resistance to doing? And then you just do that. The next time you do a deep focused thing, like when you do a sprint, just eat your death cookie. And I can't, like, it's hard for me to comprehend how much joy I'm feeling because I'm seeing it finally start to get into my closest friends. And it's because it was articulated into this really bite-sized, simple game thing. And yeah, it's just really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think being able to like memify these things that you know are powerful and create boundaries for people to do them is definitely a beautiful thing to do. That's not something I've done, and maybe I need to do that. But I also think that the things I'm doing now are working, and I'm getting a lot of catharsis, I think, in fulfillment out of exploring in the way that I'm exploring. And it's like, it's making ends meet for me. So it's one of those things where I guess I don't feel super compelled to do it in that exact way, but I'm not at all against it. I'm not saying I wouldn't do it.
Yeah. And like, I approach it really as like a type of art, like it's, this is, take this for what you will, but I had a ayahuasca journey last year, and like,
oh yeah,
really
yeah,
what came through really powerfully was like design games, like learn how to. And I thought when that first came through that I was going to like make a new type of Fallout, and I was going to work with like a VR. No, the way it's translated into is like these little memes of behavior patterns that are informed by my research that I know through both the research and the effect it has on people. It helps people. And it's such a fun game because the truth is, and this is why I was asking some of the questions I was asking of you earlier, is you have anyone who has gotten to any type of place of peace and fulfillment and happiness at all, they have a trail of these little micro games that they've learned mostly intuitively, that if they were to explicate as a type of art form and then wrap it inside of a meme so it can just easily pass through the blood-brain barrier of people's distraction, that it could help them right away. And because I like, each of our lives are like a work of art. I love the art that you are throwing together. Like, it's like, I would be happy if I was living your life, like, or at least my artistic output, like, it's dope. And it just feels like it would help people. And, you are not obligated, but it's my creative curiosity right now. It's just really what's alive for me, is trying to like, see what people's games are that like help them in samsara,
Yeah. Yeah. I think honestly, the truth of it is I often feel like I am compulsively obsessed with exploring the ideas that I explore. I would and did do it for many, many, many years where it made me $0. But I always knew that I needed to like verb. We've talked about this before, like feeling the need to verb about that somehow.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, I feel compelled to talk about it. I feel compelled to make things about it. And that feeds something in my psyche in a way that I feel compelled to do. And then I hope other people like it. And then slowly over years, it's, snowballed to some degree. So I almost feel like what I'm doing is kind of secondary to the obsession with the idea exploration
Yep. That
and
makes sense.
the sense and the personal sense making.
Exactly. I think
And I
that's
think if there is a game that's coming out of it, I almost feel like it's, hey, you here's some cool shit that might lead you down a path of ideas that might make some things make sense for you. And as not coherent and just as open-ended as that is,
yeah.
I think that there's a big thirst for it, because there's just, I mean, you know how it is, man. Like, you find sometimes you find just like diamonds in the rough on YouTube and you're like, "Oh my
Yeah.
god, this is the best." But to get to them, you got to go through like so much other shit, stuff you already knew, stuff there's a million different versions of, stuff that is like, completely put together by AI, whatever it is. And no shade to AI, it's a tool I use sometimes. But like, I use Midjourney all the time. But to really try to like get something that someone just really loves and pours their soul into, it's out there for sure, but it's getting
Yeah.
rarer and rarer.
For sure,
And
because there's so much noise.
yeah, and I mean, Jung and Hillman and even ancient philosophers, like, to me, they seem like they were doing the same thing that I'm doing in a way more advanced, way more incredible way that I feel like it's just an absolute blubbering idiot
For
compared
sure.
to. But I also
Yeah.
feel like there's a place for my blubbering idiocy. There's like,
100%. And that it resonates with people. And this is a point I was talking about with a friend yesterday, actually. And it's again, God bless, and all the flowers given to Rick Rubin. He is one of my idols. But I think what's so interesting is I think he has been successful for so long that and hasn't had to worry about money for so long. Because I remember Huberman asked him about like, how does he do his finances? And he's just like, I don't know. I don't do that at all. Like,
right, yeah,
he clearly
you're a
has
millionaire.
someone.
Yeah.
But what it means is he clearly has someone who brokages all of his deals, because he's definitely getting fucking paid. But a lot of people take from his book to not care about the audience. And there is a part of that is absolutely true for the artistic process, that you have to be making something from your like inner fuck or your inner, like your taste. But what is so interesting to me, and I've had this conversation with a bunch of my artist friends, is it's like Rick Rubin, when he was 23, was living in New York. He was going to the clubs every night. He was listening to what fucking slapped in the club. He was watching what people resonated with. And then he would go home and he would experiment with his friends. And then he would bring those experiments to the club and he would listen until it fucked and resonated. And then he would use that to update his taste. And he did that for years. And so people who take away, because what I'm trying to drive home to is, I think a fundamental part of the artistic process is to actually listen to your audience, but not to let them dictate your taste,
right?
But to let them reflect back to you. This is just my opinion. We don't live in a time where it is morally responsible to just be an artist who puts their fucking head down and just makes what the fuck they want to make, and they're completely deaf to how it rings. Because I think that we are in a time where there is so much pain and suffering. Like, if the statistics that I have looked at for years is like, it's worse than we can comprehend how much people are suffering. And it's like, no, listen to that call to make art, because I think that's a part of the good, like Plato's fucking the GOOD. But then a part of your responsibility to the community, to humanity, is to listen to how it reverberates so that you can figure out, okay, what will help? And again, that doesn't mean that you don't listen to your interior taste, because if you give that up, you will just put out garbage. But it's also, I really feel like we're in a time where, like, grow up and listen, like Rick Rubin did when he was in his 20s, And I think that a part of, like, both you and I would be struggling with our mental health if we put, 14 years into sharing And not only did people not give a fuck about it, but the few times they did, it was just like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, it
Like,
hurts, man. I mean, I have people close to me that are very creative and not successful, and it's like, and it's not even that they're not talented. It's just that they haven't figured out how to like put it all together right. And it's just, yeah, it hurts, man. It hurts to see.
yeah. And it's like, it is the core thing that I'm feeling like called to speak to, because it does hurt to see. Is like, the more I talk about Dharma and the more I talk about art, the more that I see that everybody has it.
Mhm.
Everybody. And we're in a unique time. And it's a cliche to this point to the people who know about it, but Kevin Kelly, who I think is one of the prophets of the new world, because he understood what the internet meant way before anybody else did. And one of his most famous essays is 10,000 True Fans.
Yeah.
Or no, 1,000 True
1,000
Fans.
true fans. Yeah.
1,000 True Fans. And he wrote this thing. It's a little essay. You guys can go find it. But I think it is the key for the people interested in the individuation process who are alive right now. And it's like, fuck what the past was. We are in a new world. And a part of this new world is that we have to figure out how to create our own way. We aren't inheriting the information structures that make sense in this new world. So there is a tragedy there, and it's destroying a lot of people, because we have to each figure it out ourselves. But the task of the individuation process, as it applies to just having enough financial security to feed your individuation process, is 1,000 true fans. It's not, you have to create a company to maximize profit, to sell to the fucking, New York Stock Exchange and make 100 million. I never want that. I do not want to make enough money where then my craft is the art of money. Fuck that. No. But we all have the calling. And really, I think, this is where I'm getting the most out on the ledge. But I think we have a moral imperative that if we have the capacity to see the game, it's to figure out how to live as an artist so that we can put out the good that is trying to come through us as our artistic taste, as a vocation. Because I actually think it is the best way to respond to the catastrophe that's happening. Because the thing that's so interesting, and I'm sure that you see this, is the people that I know who are the most into conspiratorial thinking are the most talented suppressed artists that I know. Every single one of them, not everyone, because like maybe 10% are just genuinely in a psychosis, and that there's like genuine healing that needs to happen. But like 90% of them are incredibly gifted, have a deep artistic taste, but they have this just deep wound around either expressing themselves to be judged or figuring out how to merge their creative calling in a way where they make money because they have shame or guilt. Like, I had to go through this personally, but when I was a teenager, it was like anyone who sold anything I thought was a piece of shit. But I would take on $80,000 in debt to go to a college to get a degree that taught me almost nothing that translated to waking or to like the real world. And I had to get over that shit, And I think that it's so alive in me right now because I see it as the main pain point to most of the people around me.
Right.
And I carry the burden of having at least one path out of that, and it's this weird thing. Yeah. Cause like a part of me is talking about it, but also a part of me is like, no one's talking about this for art.
Yeah. I mean, that definitely reminds me of the part of the Plato's Cave story of the sort of reluctant descent back in, right? Because you, in that sense, figured it out. Like you figured a way out.
A way.
In terms of that. And now you do have genuine insight into how other people can do it. And dude, it's funny just how many things just I'm picking out of your story like fit right back into Plato's Cave, because you're talking about the people that you're closest to being the ones least likely to listen to these things. And that's like precisely like the people who you go back into the cave and they're like, no, I want to just, I know you're trying to help me, or you're trying to like, maybe help me is even too strong of a word. I know you're trying to like share something you figured out, but yeah, it's maybe I'll do it later, or like just whatever, like whatever resistance there is. And that's just yet another example of just how, and this is something I said in the audio version of the cave. I added like an extra 10 or so minutes of rambling.
Oh,
And
cool.
one of the things is like, when Campbell says that myths are truer than true, this myth is such a great exemplar of that, because it's exactly like what we're talking about. Like, you and I can be talking about mundane things, and I'm seeing the cave in what you're saying.
I love that.
That's an example of how myths can be truer than something that's literally true, is that you can keep mapping the grammar of that myth over all these different dimensions of life, and it keeps making more and more and more and more sense. And you keep seeing it in this sort of archetypal way where it's so true and undeniable.
Yeah, a thing that comes to mind to ask you, because what my mind likes to do is it's so easy to see how we are the ones that have something from the sun and we want to bring it back. One of the most interesting, like, cognitive events that I've ever had in my life are the few times, and track with me here because you might laugh or think I'm joking, is when I'm in an argument with my partner and something in me changes where, and I don't know where this comes from, but every so often I get the capacity to really step outside of my self-righteousness and like peek around the corner of my own self-righteousness. And I see, oh, wow, they're right. I have been wrong. Like, I have fundamentally missed a thing.
Yeah.
And it's such a, and then the moment that I speak to that, the tension that may have been brewing for weeks, I can feel it evaporate. And it's just like, why is this so hard to do? Why do I stubbornly?
It's funny because in everything you're telling me, again, I'm thinking yet again of the cave.
And that's why I brought it up, is it's like the part of us, because really the meta point of everything that we're talking about here is it's like the person that you have the most intimate relationship with. You guys have been fighting about something over the course of months or years. And, you know, it doesn't have to be a big thing, but there's like a point of contention and you really think that you're right and they're just wrong. But it's like, what does it take subjectively to do the thing that almost none of my friends have been able to do when it comes to this like path of the artist, individuation, deep work, like give your whole self to it? Like, what is that when it comes to our closest partner? You know, like, what is the thing that I'm not seeing that they're rolling their eyes at? That, like, if someone tells me on a podcast, I come back and I'm like, oh my God, I figured out that I need to eat less processed foods. And they just are like, you know, bitch, I've been trying to tell you that for 6 years. I'm a dietitian, you know? And it's just, I'm curious if you have had those moments or if you know what I'm talking about. And if you have, just like, what that was like for you.
Yeah, I think it gets a lot. I mean, obviously, I still have those moments all the time. Like, I want to be so clear in any of this shit that we're talking about hypothetically. I'm not coming from the standpoint of having it all figured out or having gotten out of the cave. That's not what I'm ever trying to portray whatsoever.
No,
but
all we got to do is bring our partners on the podcast and have them testify that we have, in fact, not gotten out of the cave.
For sure. But what I think is easy to do is when you look back on a time where you were clearly way less aware and awake than you are now. Like, look at decades ago, you as a child, you as a 20-year-old, whatever, where we're decades away from these points. And what I would say is that one of the major differences is that we are stuck in things akin to lower levels of the cave because we're more invested in our emotions. We're more invested in our ego. We're more invested in proving something to ourselves and proving something to other people. And all of that stuff is pure doxa, low level Plato's cave shit. Because to get out of those, you have to be able to lay your emotions aside. You have to be able to act in accordance with virtues rather than acting in accordance with like winning or one-upsmanship. And when you're able to do that, when you're able to truly let logic prevail in your mundane doings, that I think is a major step out of the cave, where you're not just following emotions and you're not just trying to get back at people and you're not letting your own neuroses go on autopilot and run amok in your relationship and stuff, and you're aware of those things and you're aware of those tendencies. I think those are all moments of majorly like peeking around that corner, or and again, man, it's so interesting because exactly the reason I was saying it reminds me of the cave, what you were saying, is because you're just talking about a phase shift in your own cognition.
Right.
You're talking about suddenly viewing things from a different POV, where your emotions look littler, all your like little points that you're fighting about look littler, and you're just like, oh, I could just be in this point of view, and it's not like I can just decide. That's the thing that's so tricky about this stuff, is there's too many like manifestation gurus out there that try to make this stuff seem like a conscious choice. That's not what it is.
Right.
It's not a conscious choice.
Because if I could choose it, I would choose it every time.
Like, right, exactly. It's like it's coming to a realization slowly over time because you badly want to, and you're willing to look under the rugs of your own behavior and your own history and what you're doing in the moment and be like, I don't like this. And I here's why I don't like it, because it's gross and I'm being a slave to my own emotions and my own like crying baby inside or whatever it is.
Yeah. The thing that
go on. No, go ahead. I was gonna shift the gears a little bit. So
yeah, I'm just gonna share one more thing because I'm actively musing on like, why is it so hard for me? And the two things that are coming up as potentialities is when we hear a gem from a friend that could change our life, I think there's a part of us that can't see the sheen on the gem because we see all the parts of them that aren't polished.
Yeah.
And it's almost like we just can't receive it. But when it comes from someone on the screen that we don't actually know and we only hear them on a podcast or whatever, a healthy part of projection is that we get to actually project a part of our ideal self through that. And it's almost like the sheen of that jewel can come through. Mm-hmm. And I think the other half of it is there's something so tender and deeply unconscious in all of us that whenever anyone close to us has a gem that they're trying to give to us, the very first sheath that gem has to pass through to land in our heart is our shame.
Yeah.
And I just think that like, that's the, like, I have a couple of examples of people close to me that when I tried to help them directly, it only hurt them. And then it wasn't until I started writing my blog and I started recording a podcast that I'll just tell the story quick. It was my mom. When I first started to learn a couple of things about like how to eat healthier and how to like, blah, blah, blah. I kept trying to share these things with her when I was in college. And she eventually called me one day and was like, Erick, I can't talk to you on the phone anymore. Because every time we talk, it feels like I'm just doing everything wrong. Mm-hmm. And that fucking broke my heart because that was not my intention. Then fast forward like 4 years later, I had been writing on a blog that no one read, or at least I didn't think so. And I had started a podcast that I didn't think anyone listened to. And then I got a text from my mom one day and she said, hey, I just want you to know I've been reading your blog and listening to your podcast. And I've started doing some of the things that you've recommended. And I've gotten off of all of my medication. And I screenshotted that. And it's one of my most prized possessions. And it reminds me of like the things that you would most want to give the people that you love most. There's this really incredible game that we get to play now because of the Shimmer, where I can just put it out there and just trust that when people are ready, they can come to it. And there isn't that activation of shame that happens when it's me looking you in the eye, being like, hey, this addiction you have, like, let's look at it. It's just, it's too shameful. And so I just wanted to share that because I was musing on like, yeah, it's shame.
Yeah, definitely, man. Yeah, that's a powerful story. I think we should do the 30-second elevator explanation of the Shimmer again, because I don't think we defined it in this.
Oh, cool. Okay. So yeah, it's basically the totality of the digital world. And just the thing that I really want to hammer is that Before 60 years ago, every genius, every philosopher, every psychologist, every doctor, they were navigating two realms, the interior and then the space-time, like what the Platonics talked about is like, there's the mind and then there's space-time. They're not different. They're just two fractions through the same jewel. Something has changed and there's a third realm now, and it's not all mind and it's not completely subject to space-time, because things that happen on a screen, they register to your consciousness as if it's a space-time event. But like a person's face can explode into 1,000 fractal things and come back together. And that can't happen in space-time, but that can happen on the screen, and your attention confused to the screen and it registers in you as a space-time event.
Yeah.
And so like it's so close to us because we have untrained attentional systems that a third realm has arrived in the game of life in the last 60 years that Plato never could contend with, that Jung never could contend with. And it's this thing that is so close to us that we can't see it, but it is a new realm. And without going too deep into it, it is changing everything.
Yeah. Yeah, man. It's like it's like the shadows within the shadows. It's like if the shadows themselves had a shadow. And that's actually a really good point in what it means to coexist in different worlds at the same time, that we can fool ourselves into thinking that there's some kind of real dualism there or real trialism there, right? Like that, like to use this model, there's the Shimmer, the digital, the internet world, there's the physical world, there's the mental world. And in a sense, we all know what we mean when we say those things, but they're not actually separate. But to see what the strings are that tie all the worlds together is tricky. It's really difficult, but it can be done. It can be done. So when I said I wanted to, and this is kind of interesting way to shift into what I was saying, I wanted to like throw at you and see if it elicits any kind of epiphanies or thoughts, is since you said you did watch the cave video and you became associated with some of these ideas, maybe not for the first time, but are more fresh out of your mind.
Really landed. Yeah.
When you look back now on things like your darkness retreats or things like your most potent ayahuasca retreats or whatever, is there anything that lands in you as a note that you thought, like, as you're watching that, you're like, oh, this was a noesis, or that this was like a kind of knowing, like an intimate, direct, intuitive knowing of something immortal? And I'm not saying in the weird Florida example I gave earlier of not being able to really know what it's like. I know that you can't like fully language it, but
for sure. Yeah. So there's a couple. There's, honestly a lot, but I think the main one and the one that stands out the most is there is something radically unique about the darkness experience where no psychedelic can ever elicit this response, because a psychedelic, that you're ingesting something. Whereas in the darkness retreat, there's a moment that happens on day 3 or 4 where the pulsing light starts.
Mm-hmm.
And the noesis of that moment is probably my most cherished subjective experience that didn't involve like being in love or, and it was the felt sense of like I have a deep relationship with my dreams. So like I've known, but with the waking lucidity and with the complete absence of any incoming data, to be able to feel viscerally a deeper intelligence almost starting to like yawn awake in me.
Wow, dude.
Like it is in a completely different stratosphere of anything that's ever happened with ayahuasca or mushrooms or DMT or 5-MeO. Like there is a like a purity. And I don't mean that to like cast that there's something unpure about these other things, but it's like, it is an emergent intelligence that feels like you're feeling its like heartbeat, and it's just like in the room with you. And it's I think you can only get it through the darkness.
That's really, really interesting, particularly from the more kind of Neoplaton, well, just not even Neoplaton, but Plotinus kind of standpoint, because he's so insistent on the importance of removing what he call, I think we probably talked about this during the Darkness Retreat one, but it's hitting again for me here, is the importance of removing yourself from sensory input so that you can see this essentially like the noose, like the noose world, and that world, and this is, I'm not saying that this is what you experience, but tell me if this resonates, that world feels more kind of real than this world, and that it's almost like you can't believe that you're in that world and in this world at the same time. That's kind of the way that he would talk about it, because he would talk about walking in the noetic and then being like, oh, this is what I am for sure.
Yeah.
But then he would come back to his body and just be like, huh.
Yeah.
Like it almost like I am definitely there and in whatever that is, but I'm also here. And in this like strangely non-dual kind of way. And honestly, you're probably one of the only people I personally know that's gone to that extent with sensory deprivation for that length of time. So I'm just really curious if that.
Yeah. So the
hilarity
of this is that if you had asked me that after my first retreat, I would have been like, yeah. But after my second retreat, and I stayed in there 2 days longer, here's what my intuition is. My intuition is that Plotinus is talking from a place where he's talking from the place of a master who has learned how to stabilize his mental apparatus in the awe of that thing, where he can be in it and be calm. What happened for me is the first time, the way it came on is, as you're articulating, it feels like more real than real. And it just felt almost like a whale-like thing was behind me, and I could just feel its heartbeat, and it was very beautiful. But then what I realized in hindsight is that it's like that was it saying hello. But then when I went back a year later and I stayed in 2 days longer, the heartbeat turned into like one of the hardest experiences of my life. And so the story that comes to mind is when Arjuna is not listening to the advice of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna eventually gets fed up and it's like, I'm going to fucking show you who I am. And he begins to reveal his true form as like the God of gods. And this image has never left me since I've read about it. But the way the translation that I had went is that Krishna opens its mouth and starts to show the full mysterium tremendum, and it almost like dissolves and pulls in Arjuna's consciousness. And Arjuna just weeps and screams for Krishna to stop and to please put his facade back on because it's too much. What it felt like in my most recent one is I was Arjuna, just like it overwhelmed. And like, honestly, I don't know if you remember, but if you look at my eyes on the podcast that I did with you right after I came out of the darkness, I can see that I have like a residual trauma response in my eyes. My eyes are like really like fucking just super wide in a way that they never are. Like that's the only time I've ever seen my eyes look like that. And it wasn't until, a couple of weeks of processing afterwards that I realized that, like, without going too deep into the story, the pulsating light of the other, like, had to make me disorganized enough so that a deeply lodged trauma that I had that I hadn't let out could come out. And I think I told you this, but it resulted in me having, from the outside, it looked like I was having a seizure. Like I was on the bed, like convulsing, but because I'd been in the darkness and I'd been meditating, I was able to just watch my body do this thing and not judge it. And then I realized that I was working through this stored trauma that I'd occurred a couple of years ago.
Wow.
And so with that said, it feels like I'm going to be doing the darkness retreats probably yearly, for the rest of my life, unless something radical changes. And what I intuit is maybe after 10 years, I can report back and tell you yes. But it feels like what will be required is learning how to stabilize my attentional system to be calm in the midst of this overwhelming truth that is not coming through with any content. It is just this like vibrational light that sometimes has designs in it, but it's not conceptual. So that's the best I can do.
Man, this is what's one of those things that's really frustrating about when you read all this stuff and you hear about all these concepts that are what we would consider to be kind of metaphysical or spiritual or maybe altered consciousness things. You sort of just don't know you just of course don't know what it would be like to experience a reality of the thing that they're talking about. So then it always makes me think like, what in their writings might be that experience that you're describing? Because you would know better than I would. Is what you're describing here, from what I remember in previous conversations, the answer seems to be yes, that this is kind of a consistent thing that people experience on day 3 or 4.
100%.
Yeah. So just to reiterate, on day 3 or 4, this sort of light emerges that feels like it has an almost like rhythmic pulsing feature, phenomenology to it.
Yeah.
And then of the people who have done this more and have done this for like longer periods of time, does there seem to be a grammar, or is it?
Yeah. So,
and again, man, it's like, it's making me remember too, obviously the Tibetan Buddhism thing. Those are probably the people who know how to stabilize in this.
Exactly. So check this out. In the Buddhist tradition, this is basically like a graduate level ritual that you go through. And depending on the lineage, you're in there for at the very least like a month and a half. But you don't go in there until you've mastered a lot of the concentration techniques, because basically what happens is most well-run darkness retreats won't let first timers or people who aren't experienced meditators do more than 4 days, because it's very risky, because it's so destabilizing that it can actually traumatize or elicit and trigger like a psychosis. But if you're able to thread that needle, and I'll report back in a year, because the next time I go, I'm going to see if I can do 8 to 10 days, because I really want to experience what is on the other side of this. But the reports are that if you can stabilize through the discordant cacophony that the lights become once they really get going, is that the lights start to cohere into waking dream forms. So it starts to become like a type of waking dream. And
okay.
Right. And so the few people that I've spoken to who have gotten to those places, it's like none of them report having like, they don't have control over what's happening. But like if they eat a certain type of food, they might start to see the light turn into like a plant that is a potato plant, that then like that they start to see that image, because that's what's being elicited through their sensorium as they're eating, the fucking potato in the darkness. But what the Buddhist traditions report is that once you get to that place, you can basically start doing quote unquote, like quests, and you can go to the different realms and like learn from the gods at this realm, and then you can learn from the demons at this realm, and then you can learn from the bodhisattvas at this realm.
Dude, that sounds so exactly like what the Platonists talk about, man. That sounds so, because he's lit like Plotinus again. He literally talks about doing things like walking and doing things in a way that doesn't sound like he's being metaphorical. but that he's like actually hanging out there, and that you have some kind of what feels like a body there. And in the, again, this is the realm of nous, capital M mind, and there's definitely stuff and beings and inhabitants, and yeah, so it really sounds similar.
100%. I don't know the exact map off the top of my head, but it's a really well-known map that there are, I think it's like 7 realms, and there are specific type of entities that occupy each of those realms. You know, like one is the hungry ghosts. The one at the very top are the like most powerful gods, but they don't have the compassionate heart to care. And so it's like, it's the archetype of like, I'm a king, I have all the money, I have all the food, and I'm just happy being a king. And it's just like the god, like they're like the lazy gods. And that one stands out to me. But basically there's like the hungry ghosts are somewhere at the bottom. But yeah, they like a part of just the task is you go learn from each of those realms in that kind of like waking dream state.
Wow, man, this shit is so fascinating. I feel like there's got to be, I know you can't achieve these states in shorter bursts of darkness, but I have to imagine that building some kind of daily practice around sensory deprivation is probably a good idea, just so it's familiar. It's never going to be familiar doing it for days and days on end. Like, I think that's going to be like a marathon, but in the same way, it seems like you must need to do that. I don't know. Is that something you're actively doing or no?
100%. So one of like all of the like mythopoetic stuff that I do about the Shimmer, all of the like games like the sprints and the death cookies and everything that I'm putting so much artistic work into, the joke I tell the people who care about what I'm talking about, the joke I tell them all the time is all of this stuff is shitty substitutions that I hope will one day get you to actually start to meditate.
Yeah, yeah.
Because the research on meditation, the like punchy quote is, if any pill could do even 2 of the things that meditation has been shown scientifically, it can do 50. And I have an article that I wrote that has like 80 citations. If any pill could prove that it did 2 of those 50 things, it would be the most successful pharmaceutical that has ever been created. Like, and most people just won't do it. And
yeah,
so for me, like the practice is every day I try to do half an hour, but it's somewhere between 10 and like 50 minutes, and 50 is super rare. But it's what the Buddha taught, which is the thing that everybody listening to this already knows. And the moment I try to articulate it, their attention is going to start to slip away because there's resistance. And it's, you pick any object of consciousness to intend to keep your attention upon. And the most recommended one is the breath. Within seconds, you will get fused into a thought or an image or a sensation in your body or some combination of the 3. At some point, you'll notice that you forgot that you were trying to meditate, and then you bring it back. And that moment of realizing it and bringing it back is the muscle that you're training. In order to get your mind to the point where your mind can walk. So the example I give to people is all of us learned how to walk. And in order to learn how to walk, the moment you could summon the capacity to attempt to walk, you had a compulsion to try dozens of times a day, every day, until you could walk. And the average amount of times that each of us attempted to walk and failed is 3,000. But what made it work is that you do it every day, and then something clicks in your unconscious because it's such a complex task that then it can become effortless. What Buddhism is trying to do is the beginning to get your mind to be able to walk is you have to practice that one technique every day for years. And depending on who you talk to, there's some people that say that you can do it in 2 years if you do it every day for at least half an hour and you're actually doing the thing. And older texts say it takes like 8 years. But the key is you do it every day, and you don't know when, but at some point something will click and you now have the capacity, just like learning how to walk, where you can hold your attention where you want it to go. that is the thing that will guide you through things like the darkness. And that is the thing that will honestly be able to guide you through literally any type of experience that causes pain or discomfort or whatever. So since the darkness, it's like I've had to create an entire, like everything that I do to make money ultimately comes back to, in order for me not to be a hypocrite, I have to meditate every day. And it's almost like I've created that type of apparatus for myself to make myself sit the fuck down and actually do the thing that a deep part of me knows. Erick, this is the only thing that you have to learn how to do. That if you learned how to do, it would take care of everything else. And it's possible and it's real. And you just have to sit the fuck down and put in at least a good 10 minutes. So it's to meditate.
Beautiful, brother. It's been another fantastic mind meld. As usual, we could literally just go on, and I would love to. But I'm also starting to feel the call from the hunger gods.
Yep.
So let's wrap this one up.
Absolutely.
I love you.
I love you too, man.
Thanks
this is
for
so much
doing it
fun
again, man. Always.